Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Day 9 Daily number 435 part 2, where we learn to be a better gamer. I had to briefly check to make sure I'd said the right number. Oh god, cracking your knuckles is not nearly as cool unless you crack all of them. If you just crack one with a uncool as hell. But fortunately, Polt and Stephano are very cool. Their play is remarkable, and we're going to continue to remark upon it. I did want to, of course, note that after the daily is the After Hours Gaming League week number. Who cares? It's the playoffs, where we will be watching none other than the epic match in the top left. IBM versus Facebook. Facebook dethroning the previous champs, Microsoft, in their previous round. What will occur? Who knows? Well, you will in about 3 hours once the cast is over. Let's go back to this game. In this game, we were looking a little bit at the somewhat unorthodox style that we were seeing out of both of these players. Stephano, in particular, is starting his layer way late at around 8 minutes and 30 seconds, but he's been focusing almost all the time on droning and, most importantly, upgrading for those Zerglingis. Let's go ahead and speed the game up. Creep spread going to be very important. Ordinarily, how do we defend versus drops? Well, we have Mutalisks to float around and fly about the map, but we don't have Mutalisks when we're doing Stephano style. So we want creep everywhere, so that way our Zerglings can get everywhere as quickly as possible. Some of our Zerglings are going to, of course, be helpful in some way, shape, or form. But generally, as you're getting the layer, this is when Stephano will start to ling it like crazy. And he's going to go for a lot of these counterattacks, but notice how on point Polt is with his amazing positioning on these Mariners. And what you're witnessing right here is the last position you ever want to be in with Zerglings, where you're trying to surround a bunch of Hellions from someone who controls at a GSL Coda S level. Polt kills off this expansion. How awesome, in the midst of that entire counterattack. Stephano tries to do the surround and defend, but Polt just pulls back to the Hellions for some very nice defense, but Stephano with his 1-1 lings is in good position to take out the majority of it anyways. I'm always torn when I have to open my window because it gets so hot. But I think the apocalypse started just like 20 seconds ago. There's an ambulance, there's a fire truck, and there's a barking dog. Even the dogs don't like it. Have you ever watched a disaster movie? Like, I don't know, the old Volcano, or The Day After Tomorrow, or whatever it is? In those movies, you know what the first people always freak out are? Birds. They show a photo of trees and all the birds flutter away. And dogs just look up and they start barking. And there's always some scene with a family that's going to be dead in like 20 minutes. And they're like, well, Frankie is discontented in the backyard. Oh, Frankie's always discontented when he hasn't gotten a treat. Apparently, Frankie didn't get a treat out here in LA. Nice. Either way, Polt, let me just note, if you're having a lot of trouble versus big Zergling armies, the best advice I can give you is to cluster up and stand still. Polt literally just stands still almost all the time against these big Zergling forces that Stephano hurls at him. He just chills, man. He stands still. Now, I want to come to this unit's loss tab and note that, yeah, obviously Polt has killed off a lot more than Stephano. More importantly, though, I want to come back to, I guess it would be right here, right after he killed off this expansion, where there was this gigantic disparity where literally it was micro versus micro and all that good stuff, but, or micro versus not micro from the Zerglings. This ends up being kinda somewhat even in terms of the exchange of this battle. Obviously favors Polt a little teensy bit, but not by much. It's a fairly even exchange. The important thing, though, is that in terms of... Oh, no, did I just restart the replay? Damn it. Let me come back here. In terms of the workers lost, there still hasn't been any killed off. Stephano is actually doing pretty much fine. Stephano doesn't desperately need this up. It will benefit from it. So I think this is an interesting aspect to his style. He just wants to eventually get up the Infestors and the Zerglings. And obviously a huge benefit to Polt doing this sort of aggressive style is he can always pop back and retreat. And what brilliant thing did Polt do? Well, that next step was getting his orbital command up and ready to rock, and that he did. Stephano, mass upgrades. Insta infestation pit with the pathogen glands. Insta hive when he has the cache. And of course, if you wait till you're past 30 seconds on the pathogen glands, that's when you start the infestors. So that way they'll finish right afterwards. Wonderful. And Stephano's just going to re-expand. No big deal, none at all. And we can see that this is a moment where if we go to the Units tab, we can see that Stephano's doing fine. If we look at the food counts, Stephano's doing fine, 101 to 108. If we go to the Units Lost tab, it's easy to go, oh, he's losing. He's not losing, he's in great condition. He's doing fantastic. Now, the thing that is going to be a little bit unusual from TSL's Polt is going to be happening later on down the line. Right now, he is just fleshing out his infrastructure, or I guess I should say rounding out his infrastructure. 2 factories for tank. Shit ton of barracks for shit ton of Marines. Wonderful. Easy peasy. A medevac, or excuse me, a double starport for double medevac production. The only thing I might be like, oh, Polt, about is that he has 1 engineering bay and no more, but that's not really a big deal. Yeah, so great. Looks good. What we're going to see, though, from Polt down the line is a lot more interesting decision-making in terms of the mid-game army. Almost always what we see from Terran is Marine tank medevac in the middle, and then down here in the late game, we see like Ghosts and Vikings and some siege tanks. The big high-tech units, maybe some Ravens get thrown in there. Thorzane is most notable for his crazy late-game usage with the Ghosts and Vikings, and some Thors get thrown in there. I just want to throw out that that's the usual mix. Marine tank medevac, and then in the late game, we throw in a lot of Ghosts, a lot of Vikings, and maybe some Thors and Ravens. I just want you to keep that on the mind for now. From the Zerg point of view, everything ends up being pretty clear from Stephano's point of view. Once he gets the infestors out, that's really when the direct aggression might end up happening. The Zergling counterattack we saw at the start of the game is sort of like an optional, beneficial thing, not a necessary component. But what we're going to see Stephano do is he's going to spend his money, or he's going to spend his gas on infestors, upgrades, teching, and ultralisks. Not really on any units. His only gas unit is really going to be the infestor. And I know it's very easy to say, well, what if he makes this and what if he makes that? If he's doing anything sort of marine-ish, tankish focus, don't vary. Do not vary. Ready, set, don't vary. Don't. Build no variations except marine or Zerglings and infestors. And if you lose with the Zerglings, then you should have built more Zerglings. That's the box that I want you to think in. Yeah. Polt is just defending right now. I'll ignore what he's doing for a brief period of time, because I honestly think that what Stephano's going to be doing is more interesting for races of all. Hatchery coming up. 3-3 upgrades will be beginning shortly. Many Zerglings in production. A good amount of roaches. Yep, there's the 3-3. Excuse me, a good amount of drones. I'm misspeaking a lot today. Woohoo! And here is an incredibly important upgrade, the burrow. Just want to make sure that you are aware that burrow happens approximately at the hive. Why no earlier? Because we're not really going to be attacking earlier. Stephano is spreading himself out in defensive mode. He can begin to push with the infestor ling. If that were a... Let's take a map like Shattered Temple. Let's envision that map for a moment. Or Entombed Valley. We can do those kinds of pushes to help deny a third base, to put pressure on him when he's taking a third. If you watch the IPL three finals between, or the semifinals between Stephano and OGS, the STC. We saw on their game on Shattered Temple, right when this Ling Infestor pops up, Stephano makes a push, non-committally, kind of throwing down a few infested Terran balls, seeing where the tanks were, and then retreating. Good stuff. On this map, I just want you to envision for a moment, why would we attack? This is a moment I wanted to spend a little bit of time on. Why would we attack? What would be the purpose of a Ling Infestor attack right now? There is the now answer of, well, it could maybe kill off this third. It could maybe kill off his fourth in the middle. We might be able to get a really good land on the Infestor. Maybe he has a vulnerability where he simply doesn't have enough units. All those are discussions of now. But now I'm going to re-ask the question, why would we make a Ling Infestor push? But I want you to answer the question in terms of later. Later, later, later. How would it help us later? For instance, maybe we could shut down a third base, which would help us overpower him with units later. Later we would do that. Maybe it would buy us time to get up an expansion, or buy us time to get up some kind of tech. Here are a whole bunch of circumstances, but let's start going through them. Well, if we made an attack that could break, or that could deny his third base, then I think that would be a good reason to attack, because that would help us in the later period. But he already has a well-established third base. And then you might say, well, what about trying to make an attack on the third base to kill that off? So that way we would win in the economy term later on. Well, I would come and say, can you actually do that? Can you actually break in an entrenched position like this one? And if your answer is probably not, don't do it. Pretty simple, but still notice that it's the later. We always ask, well, it'll help us later if we took the third. Can we do something right now about it? Well, no, it looks like attacking doesn't work. What about attacking to buy us time to get up some sort of tech? Well, if he is taking his third and defending it and focusing on that, we have all the time in the world to get these expansions, or get these upgrades up. We have all the time in the world to get these expansions up. Any goal that we can have for later isn't really helped by any attack now. So let me do a differing example. Let's say that we were in that game between Stephano and OGS, the STC, on Shattered Temple, where STC had been a little bit aggressive. There'd been some exchanges. Not too much was won or lost by either player. And now Stephano's trying to go for Ultralisks. He's trying to get his hive up. Well, an attack actually would help quite a bit, as the STC is desperately trying to get a third up. We can throw down some extra units and see if we can crack his position in any way, all the while STC is going, ah! Which is another way of saying he can't attack. It's these types of little bits of analysis that are really, really, really useful. An attack serves no purpose for later. It serves no purpose for later. And of course, burrow. Burrow will help us with our infestors now, but it'll also help us do a burrow trick here to block his expansions, which helps us out later. The queen, the third queen that we built for defense early on in the game, also helps us spread these creep tumors out later. We're seeing these threads slowly weave together into this brilliant collection of stuff for later. Now, here is something, this mix, this composition from Polt, is where I would describe the unorthodoxy of Polt to step in. I will note right now that Polt's upgrades are some of the slowest in the entire industry. He has the slowest upgrades of anyone. Like 15 minutes, Bomber or MMA, they'd be like started with 3-3 already. Not Polt. He is really slow with his upgrades, and he is really heavy on his mech units. 3 factories with Tech Lab, 1 starport. Any tech to ghosts? F no. F no, dude. Just mass marine. And look at this. Interestingly, we see some tech labs coming down here. Here is the interesting mixture that we're going to start seeing out of Polt. He's going to incorporate marauders and way more factory units than your average bear. Way more. As a note, that helps us now. We have a huge army right now. But I want you to just think in your head what happens later. Notice I'm kind of leaving the Terran stuff out for a bit. How does that help us out later? This is the answer that many Terrans have struggled with. How do I deal with this sort of Brood Lord, this sort of Ultralisk tech? Man, I better speed this up a bit. We only have 3 minutes left in this portion of the daily. So here we see the Zerglings continue to stream forward. We see this great pushing attempt by Stephano. Obviously, in the now, we can maybe kill off some stuff, but in the how does this help us later? It helps us get control of these bases right here. It will also help us get control if we want to go for a Spire or something like that. Buys us a good chunk of time. Times twoing it. We're not even halfway done with this replay, but I'm going to have to continue to step forward a little bit. Ooh, Ventral Sacs and Speed Overlords. Obviously going to be good for some sort of drop tech in the latter points. So these kinds of attacks, these kinds of drops, always make me feel a little bit like, how does this help so much? This is what a lot of the Korean Pro Terrans are good at. They'll do drops to get the Zerg player a little bit out of position. They'll help them gain some ground. You saw that this drop seemingly uselessly got owned. However, all Stephano's resources were right down there. That's where the focus was. I mean, literally come back like 10 seconds. Here comes the drop. Bump, ba-dum, dum, da-dum, ba-dum. This ever happened to you? Oh, God. Here in this moment, we see the real difference between that tragic experience you might have on the ladder and Polt, the GSL Codes champion, gets crushed. Ugh, didn't that feel terrible? Well, not for Polt. He used that to buy time so he could get up his planetary fortress. It has a now purpose and it has a later purpose. The now purpose, maybe I'll win with a drop. The later purpose helps me buy time for the planetary. Now, one of the big reasons I ended up choosing this game for the daily is that this game is not halfway done yet. This is not halfway done at all. So, what this means is that there's going to be a whole lot of trading of big hive tech armies, a fleshed out complete Terran tech tree, and where all decision making seems to fall apart for the average bear because so much of modern StarCraft 2 thought is rooted in build orders. Here's the build I do. The builders are the units I get, and it's about my units. We want to think more, though, about how we position things. And the questions we're going to ask aren't going to change. It's still going to be, what are we going to do now, and how does that help later? The immediate benefit of us doing this push now, we can kill off this expansion. Almost all decisions in the late game are going to be about expansions. More importantly, by the way, look how many tanks this guy has. What a nutcase. But in the later, it helps us secure this expansion. Same shenanigans that we just saw happen out of Polt when he was doing that drop on the south side, which he is still doing. And Stephano pulls back. Notice he just kills off that expansion. That was the now goal. He's not going to try to go for a win. Almost no attacks in StarCraft 2 are about trying to win this game right now. Almost none. I mean, imagine if Stephano had lost everything here. Oh, well, holy crap, he has 5k, 2.5k. He has 5 bases. He's even getting his 5th up. Oh, I guess he didn't need to win with that attack. That is how every attack should look. There should always be a next step. And look at Polt. Here's another nice next step technique that he does. He's building the 5th expansion command center in a place where, if his 4th expansion command center dies, he can simply land it there and re-expand it. That's how this expansion popped up so quickly. What do we see? A drop right at the same frickin' time that this is becoming a planetary. We just saw that a moment ago. Now, it's going to help us in terms of doing damage in the main, but for later, all these units are out of position. It's helping us set up a base. Now, as we are pushing up all the way over here, with all this good stuff going on this drop, we're only going to do a few minutes more of analysis. And here we have some slugfesting going on that's pretty common for this phase of the matchup, where we see the struggles to secure expansions, these sorts of trades going up think of everything in terms of expansions. We're pushing to kill off this expansion. As Terran, we are also securing this one. Hey, look at that. Command center. Lining up so nicely. It just finished, and now we can land it down there. Easy peasy. All of this burbling I talked about, of how does it help now, how does it help later, an attack helps get up an expansion. That is about as simply as it ends up being stated. The now, how do I now help? I'm going to do an attack, and this will help in the later because it helps me build an expansion. We are 22 minutes into a 40-minute game. When we come back, we're going to finish the daily up looking so much at attack patterns, how everything ends up happening in those attack pattern sequences, a lot about how it relates to expansions, and then the end of the daily Q&A. All right, I'm going to hurry up and play this song so that way we can get on to part number 3.